Thank you so much, men of hope. We're in the Gospel of John, chapter 29. Now, this morning, back in the sunrise service, we saw that Christ reveals himself to those who sincerely seek him. Now, we talk about the next step. What are we to do with Christ after we believe in him? In other words, we're going to talk about the cost of discipleship after salvation. We must trust him to provide as you and I do his will, and love him with all of our hearts. You see, where we find ourselves here in John 21 is this. The disciples at this point, they have all accepted that Christ has indeed risen from the dead, but belief in the resurrection is not the end of their journey, for we do here see them falter in their commitment to Christ even after experiencing his resurrection, just as we all do. You know, the main section of the Gospel of John basically wrapped up with chapter number 20. As we see at the end of chapter 20, I should say. In fact, we see what would be a perfectly fine ending to the Gospel of John in the last two verses of chapter 20. And many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written, that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name. John absolutely could have ended the Gospel of John right there, but instead, John chose to include an epilogue to the Gospel. Chapter 21 serves as an epilogue to the Gospel of John. And this chapter reminds you and I that belief in the resurrection has to then be followed by loving Christ and serving Christ. Now, one of the primary purposes of chapter 21 is to wrap up the story of Peter by giving us his public reconciliation with Christ and giving us Christ's renewed blessing and renewed call on Peter's life. Because the last time we saw Peter specifically referred to, we saw him being unsure that the resurrection had happened. Now, granted, of course, Peter believed when Christ revealed himself to the 10, but in that passage, Peter was not specifically singled out. So you see, Peter's story must not end with his denial of Christ, followed by him doubting the resurrection. Your story doesn't end with your salvation or whatever mistake you have made. It goes on because Christ is here to do a wonderful work in your lives and to take you back every single time. See, next to Christ, Peter is the central figure of this epilogue. When we see the disciples in John chapter 21, the resurrected Christ, he has revealed himself to them, but then now he has gone away. And we know from Matthew chapter 28, verse 16, that Jesus Christ had commanded them to go wait for him at an unspecified mountain, and since that command, some time has passed. So for the first time in 3 years, the disciples are left to fend for themselves without the visible Jesus standing right there to provide for them. So therefore, the question now is going to be this: would they depend on themselves and go right back to their former trades? Or would they serve Christ and continue to trust Christ to meet their needs, even though he's not standing there physically in front of them? You see, in this passage, what you and I find are two contrasting dependencies. There's a dependency on your own ability to take care of yourself. And then there is dependency on Christ, doing His will while trusting Him to meet your needs. And in this chapter, what we find is the disciples making the wrong decision. And Jesus Christ uses that circumstance to bring them face to face with their own inadequacy. Verse 1 of chapter 21 opens with these three words, "after these things." Now that refers to the unspecified amount of time following the events of chapter 20. Christ has disappeared. The disciples have made their way north to a certain mountain, as they were commanded to in Matthew 28. Apparently all 11 must not have traveled together, because we only have 7 referred to here in this passage. So verse 1 goes on to say, "After these things, Jesus showed Himself again to the disciples." Now, it's interesting. This is the second time since the resurrection that John has used the phrase, "Jesus showed Himself." And that means more than just Jesus showed up, physically, literally showed up, or walked within your eyesight, but rather that Christ allowed someone to be able to clearly see who He was. You see, that which is true of Christ spiritually seems to also be true of Christ physically as well, which is that no one can recognize Christ unless Christ is revealing Himself to that person. You can't know who Christ is unless the Spirit of God opens up your eyes. Your natural senses alone are incapable of perceiving Jesus Christ. I mean, this is so true. Think about it. After Christ rose again from the dead, people who knew Him kept on not recognizing Him until He let them recognize Him. Mary didn't recognize Him even after He started speaking to her. The 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus didn't recognize Him even after a long conversation. He had to convince the disciples in the upper room, and even after seeing Christ in the upper room, those disciples still don't recognize Him at the seashore in this very passage until after He makes it clear to them that it's Him. So you see, no one can see Christ, no one can believe in Him unless the invisible Spirit of God reveals it to that person. And so God gets all of the credit for our salvation. Verse 1 says, "After these things, Jesus showed Himself to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias." Okay, that's another name for the Sea of Galilee. This location right here gives you and I the very first glimpse of the fact that all ain't right. Why are they there? Why are they at the Sea of Galilee instead of the mountain Christ told them to go to? "And on this wise showed He Himself." Verse 2, "They were together, Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of His disciples." So this is a list of the 7 disciples that take place in this account. And notice Peter is the very first one mentioned. And one reason for that, Peter is a natural leader. He was just the kind of guy that the other disciples followed. Furthermore, he was meant to be the leader of the rest of the group. But whether he would be a faithful leader, now that would all depend on the outcome of his encounter with Christ here in this passage. And in verse number 3, what we see is Peter's failure. Verse 3, "Simon Peter saith unto them, I go a-fishing." Now, when Peter says here that he is going fishing, he is referring to just more than, well, we got a few hours to kill, so I'm going to go do a little recreational fishing to pass the time. That's not what he's saying. He's referring to actually returning to the full-time fishing business, returning to depending on his own wisdom, depending on his own ability to provide for himself. Now, here are two strong evidences to support what I just said. Number one, Jesus Christ predicted in John 16, verse 32, "Behold, the hour cometh, yea, is now come, that ye shall be scattered, every man to his own." And the Greek behind every man to his own has the idea of each one returning to their own personal affairs. 1 Thessalonians 4:11 translates the same Greek phrase as, quote, "your own business." And so Christ is literally saying in John 16:32 that each disciple would return to their own business. That's number one. Number two, in verse 15, Christ is going to ask Peter, "Lovest thou me more than these?" And the "these" is clearly referring to the fish, as in the fishing business. Listen to Mark chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. "Now as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew his brother casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And Jesus said unto them, Come ye after me, and I will make you to become fishers of men. And straightway they forsook their nets and followed him." So you see, Christ had called them to abandon the fishing business. And yet, here, after just a short time without Christ, Peter has gone right back to his old nets. He's lost faith, and he has lost sight of Christ's call on his life. Now, look, obviously, we all have to work. Maybe some of us might even be literally fishermen for a living, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Christ calls us all to serve him first in all that we do, and do not ever do anything that is outside of his will. But here Peter has made a decision to go back to the life that Christ had specifically called him away from. You cannot live your life your own way. If you are outside of God's will for your life, then you are living in disobedience to Christ, and you will not have his blessing, and you will not prosper. Peter knew that Christ had risen from the dead. I mean, Peter had seen that with his own eyes. So we see clearly, Peter did not doubt Christ's victory over death, but rather he doubted Christ's ability to take care of those who are patiently doing his will. In other words, Peter never doubted Christ's victory over death, not at this point anyway, but he doubted Christ's victory over life. And that's just like some of us. This morning, would that be the state of your heart? You don't doubt his ability to take you to heaven. You don't doubt Christ's victory over death, but you doubt his victory over life. You doubt his ability to take care of you. Even after we fully become convinced, yes, Jesus rose from the dead, and even after we get saved, we do still all waver in our faith. Even after we become convinced that he is Lord, that doesn't mean that every second of every day he is our Lord. Verse 3, Simon Peter saith unto them, I go a-fishing, and look at this, they say unto them, we also go with thee. Peter was a natural leader, so when he decides to leave Christ's calling and direction, others follow him. The more Christians who do not live lives that are sold out to doing God's will, the easier it is for other Christians to believe that knowing Christ doesn't have to mean obedience, that knowing Christ doesn't have to mean having a strong faith. Part-time Christians beget part-time Christians. And what we see in the rest of verse 3 is that when we leave God's will, we are not going to be blessed, because Christ does not provide for those who are not serving him. Look at verse 3. And they went forth and entered into a ship immediately, and that night caught nothing. God's work can only be done God's way, or else it will not be blessed, it will not satisfy. It will not be blessed, and God will not sustain a work that's not what he is calling you to do. Christ wanted to confront them with their own inadequacy. And so I would humbly submit to you that he directed all the fish to specifically stay out of their nets all night in order to teach them the lesson that they are nothing without him. And Jesus is now going to show up, and he is going to make clear that he's the one who provides for them, not they for themselves. Verses 4 and 5. But when the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Then Jesus saith unto them, Children, have ye any meat? And they answered, No. Once again, they did not recognize Christ, even after he, right here, has spoken to them, which he had done twice before. Let me ask you a question. Is it possible that the reason why they didn't know him is because they were not doing his will? Listen to John 10:27. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. If you are not following Christ, you will not know Christ's voice when he speaks. Jesus did not have to provide fish for them. Think about how he could have so easily done what maybe you or I would have done if we had been Christ in this one instance. Just showed up and lambasted them. Hey, what are you doing, you bunch of jerks? What are you doing here? This is not where I told you to be. I should be over there. What's the matter with y'all? I mean, really? He could have done that, right? And he wouldn't have been wrong, but that's not what he did. That's not what he did. He revealed himself in this way. He gently and mercifully answered their doubts. He gently and mercifully answered their doubts. Kind of like he had done for Thomas, right? Come, touch me, see that I am real. Christ answered he didn't owe it to them to do that, but that's what he chose to do. He answered their doubts with reassurance. Look at verses 6 and 7. And he said unto them, Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of fishes. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved saith unto Peter, It is the Lord. Oh, fish are no problem. If you're doing my will, if I'm Lord of your life, you won't hurt for fish. Fish is not the problem. The problem is you not obeying. That is the problem. And so here we see that Christ was glorified. He was glorified here, but he was so by his power, not by their efforts. Only Christ's power at work in our lives is able to glorify him. We cannot do so through our own ability. We can't do it in the flesh. We can't do it our own way, even if we were to try to fish all night long. It's not going to work. Christ has to be in it or it's nothing. And then we see Peter's impulsive and passionate nature. And here's the thing about Peter's impulsive nature. It could be a wonderful thing when that passion was tuned in to Christ. The problem is when that passion was tuned into the things of this world, like it was 5 minutes earlier. But the moment it's tuned into Christ, then it's a wonderful thing. Look at verse number 7. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. You see that? The consummate fisherman instantly abandoned the best catch ever to just instantaneously jump in the water and start swimming to Jesus. That's the impulsiveness, the passion of Peter. But what we also see is that he was naked. Nothing in the Bible is there for no reason at all. So why is it there? To show us his degeneration. How quickly he degenerated, being apart from Christ. In just the short time he's been away from Jesus, he started to go back to his old ways and go down the wrong path. But now, instantaneously, that passion is tuned right back into Christ. And Christ has got good news for Peter. This time it's going to stay focused on me. No matter how many times you've taken your eyes off of Jesus, no matter how many times you've taken your passion off of Jesus, know this, Jesus is still right here to meet you where you are, to take you back, and you can tune right into him again. Verse 8, and the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from land, but as it were a few hundred cubits, dragging their net with fishes. See that impulsiveness again? They were so close. If he had just been willing to wait like 2 minutes, he wouldn't have abandoned the fish. But nope. Instantaneously, right back to Jesus. And in this context, that's a wonderful thing. In this context, it's a wonderful thing. Even though they were not far from shore, Peter could not wait 1 minute. Christ was as happy to see them as vice versa. And Christ now shows them, hey, you don't ever have to worry about me providing for you. You were so worried about me providing for you. You don't have to worry about that. And you know how he does so? He cooks them breakfast. He literally cooks them breakfast. I've never had fish for breakfast. But I'll eat anything that Jesus cooks me. Let Jesus cook your meals. Let Jesus cook your breakfast. Trust Jesus to provide. Look at verses 9, 10, and 11. As soon as they were come to land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon, and bread. Jesus saith unto them, bring of the fish which ye have caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of great fishes, 153. And for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken. How did they achieve such a catch? Was it with their amazing fishing abilities? Or was it because Jesus Christ is the one who made that happen? So you see, folks, you don't have to be talented. Christ is not dependent on your amazing talent or your amazing intelligence, but rather you are dependent on him. So all you must do is be sold out, be obedient to Christ. That is all he requires. Christ will provide the success. He will bring in the fishes and cause the net to not break, because he who has conquered death has conquered life as well. Verse 15, so when they had dined, Jesus saith to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? When Christ said more than these, he was referring to the fishes, because that's what he had just gone astray after. He's referring to the fishing business. Verse 15, he saith unto him, yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He saith unto him, feed my lambs. Now, as many of you have heard, in the Greek, there's more than one word for love. And here, Christ uses the word agape, which is the all-consuming sacrificial love of John 3:16, for example. Whereas Peter answers with phileo, which is a type of lesser love, a brotherly love. And why does Peter do that? And it's not because Peter, well, he doesn't really, let's not go crazy here, you know. I don't know if I agape you, but I at least phileo you. There's no way that's why Peter is saying this. It can only be because he's ashamed of himself. He is ashamed of himself concerning both his denial of Christ before the cross and the doubting of the resurrection after the resurrection and the fishing expedition he just went on. After all those failures in a row, he wants to avoid another brash declaration. What Peter is doing, he is stating his own insufficiency in his answer. Christ knows Peter's heart, and that Peter is answering as best as he knows how. And so Christ then says to him, if you truly phileo me as you say you do, feed my lambs. The lambs are the Christians who are or will be. He's saying, if you truly love me, then be about my business, not your own business. And by saying this, he's telling Peter three things. Number one, to all of us, ministering to others is how we demonstrate our love for Christ. You can't say you love Christ and not be showing love to others. Number two, if you love me, he's saying to him, do my will. Leave the fishing business. In other words, stop being so concerned about physical food and be more concerned about feeding people spiritually, the gospel. Number three, Christ is calling Peter to feed the other disciples present. He is reaffirming his call on Peter to lead the early church. Nothing is more important than our love for Christ. Nothing. And that is what Christ requires of us, that we love him with all of our hearts and therefore obey him. So he says again in verse 16, he saith to him again the second time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? He saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He saith unto him, Feed my sheep. Again, Christ says agape. Again, Peter says phileo. But now in verse 17, Christ even seems to be challenging Peter's phileo. Because in verse 17, Christ says phileo. Verse 17, he saith unto him the third time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? Peter was grieved because he said unto him the third time, lovest thou me? And he said unto him, Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I love thee. Jesus saith unto him, Feed my sheep. For the third time in a row, Christ has heard Peter's humility. He has heard Peter's recognition of his own failure and Peter's confession that he cannot even love Christ enough in his own strength. And for the third time in a row, in spite of all of Peter's failures, Christ has reaffirmed his call on Peter's life. Think about the amazing poetry that is at play here, the rhyming that is happening here. In Luke 22 and John chapter 18, we are told that Peter is standing next to a fire as he denies Christ 3 times. And here in John chapter 21, Jesus has made a fire on the beach. Peter is once again standing next to a fire as he confirms his love and dependence on Christ 3 times. You see, it does not matter how long you have been not living for the Lord or what monumental failures might be behind you. Christ will take you back if today you will trust him with your life. And now in verse 18, Christ gives Peter, he gives him the ultimate encouragement. He assures Peter, Peter, you know what? You are going to be faithful to the very end. And in verse 18, Christ reassures Peter that Peter's commitment is not going to fail. Peter shall indeed love Christ more than life itself. Verse 18 tells Peter that he will be martyred for Christ. And this is the same Christ who previously told Peter he would deny him 3 times. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. And here he tells him, you are going to die as my faithful follower. So the reason why this is the ultimate encouragement is Peter would be able to say, Christ foretold my failure, and that came to pass. And now Christ foretells my faithfulness. So I know that will come to pass as well. Verses 18 and 19. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself, and walkest whither thou wouldest. But when thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee, and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. This spake he, signifying by what death he should glorify God. When he had spoken this, he saith unto him, follow me. Peter would be crucified by the Roman Emperor Nero, and Peter would request of his own volition to be crucified upside down, because he said, I am unworthy to die in the same manner as my Lord died. I don't want there to be any confusion. I don't want people looking at 2 crosses. Just because I'm dying on a cross, I don't want anybody looking at me. There's only one cross that saves. It's his cross. Look at the crucifixion of Jesus. Because he has now come to understand that Christ calls us to trust him and love him more than anything in this whole world. Jesus Christ has risen again from the dead. And you, if you have placed your faith in him to save you forever, then you are saved. But the question now is this: lovest thou me more than these? I do not know what your these might happen to be. What are you living for other than Christ? But Christ rose again from the dead, not only to be the Lord, to be your Lord. To be the one you love most. If you love Christ, then you will be doing his will, serving his kingdom, and you will then experience his blessing in your life. So that's it. Are you doing his will? Or like Peter here was, are you honestly doing your own thing? Oh, you go to church, you give Christ his recognition, so to speak, but every day, lovest thou me more than these? Are you loving him more than anything in the whole world? Does he have the first allegiance of your heart? This morning I invite you to come forward at this invitation. As we sing this hymn of invitation together, as we stand to our feet, do you love Christ more than anything in this world? Are you serving him and doing his will? That's the only way you will experience the power of him being at work in your life and his blessing, as if you're doing his business.